Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates Interview Series on radio and podcast. The show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not just older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
Welcome to the Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates Interview Series. I'm Paul Vogelzang, and today, as part of our Inside Science interview series, we're diving deep into the most powerful organ you possess, your brain. Think about this for a moment. What if your brain isn't broken, but simply trying to regain balance in a world that constantly throws it off kilter? What if pleasure, pain, memory, and mood, all the things that make you, you, are less about mystery and more about biology? Today, we're joined by the brilliant Smithsonian Associate Dr. Camilla Nord, a neuroscientist at the University of Cambridge and author of the groundbreaking new book available at Apple Books, The Balanced Brain, The Science of Mental Health. Smithsonian Associate Dr. Camilla Nord will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up, and the title of her presentation is The Balanced Brain, The Science of Mental Health. Please check out our show notes today for more details about Dr. Nord's upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation. But we have Dr. Camilla Nord today, and in this riveting conversation, we will explore the science behind what makes us feel good or not, and how everyday actions like a walk in the park, a chat with a friend, a pet, or, yes, even a bite of chocolate literally shift the chemistry of our brains. Smithsonian Associate Dr. Camilla Nord challenges old ideas. She dismantles the myth of the mind-body divide, shows us how mood and inflammation, we've heard that before, are intimately connected, and explains why there will never be a single magic pill for mental health, because there doesn't need to be. Instead, Dr. Nord offers something more empowering, a new framework for understanding ourselves. For our audience of vibrant adults over 60, this conversation is more than science. It's a roadmap, a way to better understand what's happening under the surface and to take meaningful action now, to feel better now, to think clearer now, live longer without the stigma. So, what is a balanced brain? And how do you get one and keep it at any age? Let's find out. Here's my conversation with Smithsonian Associate Dr. Camilla Nord. Dr. Camilla Nord, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul.
It's going to be great to talk to you. You've shared your new book, The Balanced Brain, which we're going to talk about, as well as your upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation. And let's start there. Maybe tell us briefly what you're going to tell us once you tell us at Smithsonian Associates about The Balanced Brain, and maybe share with us a little bit about how you'll use Zoom to engage us. We're all on Zoom these days, and how might you use that?
Yeah, I'm so excited to get to speak to you all at the Smithsonian next Friday. And in my talk, I hope to surprise you with some interesting facts about neuroscience, a little bit about dopamine, the real story of dopamine, and then quite a lot about where mental health comes from in the brain, and perhaps why we've been going about kind of understanding and to some degree treating mental health a bit wrong. So some of what I say will be a little bit controversial. Some of what I say might just be kind of quite interesting and engaging, fun facts about neuroscience. But I really hope there's something in there for everyone who's interested in the science of mental health, into how their brain might work, how their brain might work worse or better under different circumstances.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I definitely think there will be a lot in this for all of us, irrespective of age. For those of us who are over the age of 60, we're dealing with a lot of mental health related subjects in our lives. And your book the title, of course, The Balanced Brain. Really, in my mind, as I was reading, I was thinking of this gyroscope that's constantly seeking center and that moves in a dynamic way. And I wonder if you'll tell us maybe just quickly about what that looks like for somebody as they age later in life. How does our brain kind of age and still keep this balance?
Yeah, I love that idea. I've been thinking about it a lot recently because I think there's a misconception that your brain grows and changes up until 18, or more recent research has suggested maybe like 23, 24, and then it just stops. Then your brain is your brain. Maybe it declines at some point. And that couldn't be more wrong because many mechanisms in the brain continue changing, continue their plasticity forever. So that's why you have the ability to learn things no matter what your age is because the actual physical properties of your brain, the biophysical properties of two brain cells talking to each other and connections getting stronger or weaker is not something that simply is cut short, but in fact can continue for your entire life. There are other very interesting aspects of your brain that change as you get older. So there are certain things that become more difficult. For example, fluid intelligence, very fast sort of executive function, working memory type things. There are other things that seem to just improve. General knowledge, general intelligence, you can essentially keep accumulating it. We don't really think there's a ceiling to it. So when you live longer, you actually just have this increased capacity for knowledge, which is really rather extraordinary. And then the final kind of little nugget that I'll tell you about aging, which I learned probably early on in my career, but I haven't quite figured out why yet, is that in many ways, aging is protective against mental health conditions, especially past the point of middle age. Middle age is actually a little bit of a low point for mental health conditions, but past that point, your mental health tends to improve. Your emotional well-being tends to improve. This isn't in everyone. This is at a population level. That's very interesting. We don't know why, but there's some kind of resilience in older age.
Fascinating. In your book, The Balanced Brain, The Science of Mental Health, and we will have links so that our audience can find out more about The Balanced Brain and Dr. Camilla Nord, as well as Dr. Nord's upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation. But Dr. Nord, in your book, you describe pleasure and pain and desire as really these core kind of processes of balance, the balance system, as a matter of fact. And I wonder, how do older adults kind of harness that in order to improve our mental health and well-being? Because I think those are important elements to really know so that we are pursuing them.
I think one of the messages of the balanced brain that comes across most clearly is just how individualized people's paths to mental health and ill health are. So I think one thing that can be helpful as you get older is a recognition that the things that have given you pleasure in the past might very well have changed over time. And so in fact, it's not about trying to replicate the things that maybe worked for your mental health when you were younger, but actually discovering the things that best support your mental health today and pursuing those and kind of focusing on those. The second thing to mention is that there are also kind of biological underpinnings of all of these processes that you talk about. So even something as almost, ephemeral as pleasure, desire, wanting, which I call it in my book, these have very clear biological roots. And so the better we understand those roots, the better we can understand what might help and what might compromise those aspects of your mental well-being.
My family has had its mental health challenges over the years. As a parent, you see that children can often face this, as well as older adults. And you make this case, and I certainly saw this in my own family, that there is no silver bullet. There's no magic treatment necessarily that works. And so I wonder, again, with a focus on kind of an older adult audience, how is it that we should consider kind of some of the traditional treatments to mental health, like talk therapy or medications, because I think you really do make this case that we need to be fluid. We need to think broadly and try some things that are more focused on this idea of balance.
I think one thing that could be frustrating if you've lived a long time with mental health that has probably at times been better than other times
Mhm.
is that you probably have encountered article after article, piece after piece of a journalist claiming that they have identified the solution for your mental health problems. And maybe you've tried it yourself. It's good to try things, good to be open to things, and maybe you've been frustrated because, to my knowledge, in my estimation, there is no mental health intervention that works for everyone. And I think that's something that can be very frustrating to realize. Many people have realized it. The difference is that I also think there's quite a good reason for that, which is that the biological drivers of different mental health problems are not necessarily identical. Two people with depression can clinically look very different. And in fact, also, unsurprisingly, the way they should be treated might be different. And one way to think of a biological change that's very important is your age. So, for example, the systems in your brain that might respond very well to a particular treatment in your 40s might not in your 70s, whether that system is the particular neurotransmitter targets of an antidepressant like serotonin or noradrenaline, or something that changes as a result of psychological therapy. At one point in your life, one of those treatments might suit you better than another time, and that's because of the physical changes that have happened to your brain over time.
Hi, this is Paul. Before we jump back into today's show, I want to take a moment to recognize a truly special milestone, Smithsonian Associates' 60th anniversary. Since 1965, Smithsonian Associates, the largest museum-based education program in the world, has been inspiring lifelong learners with unforgettable experiences, connecting audiences with the Smithsonian's museums, research, and experts in new and exciting ways. This year, the celebration is for you, with a full year of special programming both online and in person, from behind-the-scenes looks at Smithsonian collections to conversations with astronauts, historians, filmmakers, and curators. There's something for everyone. Smithsonian Associates has created something extraordinary. I'm proud to partner with Smithsonian Associates to share their incredible programs with the Not Old Better Show audience. Thanks for being part of this journey. Here's to 60 years of curiosity, learning, and discovery. Our guest today is Dr. Camilla Nord, who is the Smithsonian Associate, will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up. We'll have links so that you can find more information about Dr. Camilla Nord's new book titled The Balanced Brain, The Science of Mental Health. More information about Dr. Nord's work, as well as direct links to Smithsonian Associates so that you can join us for Dr. Nord's upcoming presentation. Dr. Nord, we hear a lot about inflammation these days and gut health, and you talk about both of these areas, and they play surprising roles in mental health, interestingly enough, and in wellness, of course, more broadly. What should our audience know about these physical processes in our bodies so that we can take advantage of some of the emotional resilience that comes from this idea of the balanced brain?
Yeah, well, let me tell you this story a little bit from the perspective of a skeptic. So I'm very aware of when news findings are very reliant on correlation rather than causation. And inflammation was very much a story of correlation for a long time. If you look at inflammatory markers in the blood of big population groups of people, it looks like people with mental health conditions like depression, like psychosis, sometimes anxiety, have more inflammation, heightened immune markers of inflammation. But boy, can there be a lot of reasons for that. Think about it. If you lead a different life, if you're exposed to things like pollution, poverty, differences in your diet, all of those factors will increase your risk of inflammatory conditions and just different inflammatory markers in your blood, and also increase your risk of mental health disorders. So that could easily be a sort of fake correlation, not meaning one is driving the other. Luckily, a different group of researchers came about and they started to test it really directly. They started to say, okay, if this is a real association, we should be able to just directly increase someone's levels of inflammation and then measure resulting mental health. And in fact, that's true. Something I'm going to talk about at the Smithsonian are a series of experiments that show there is a true causal relationship between increased inflammation and mental health, even such that in a short-term increased inflammation, like from a common vaccine, you might experience a very short-term change in your emotional state. And that's totally normal. Same, if you've ever felt very blue when you have the flu. That's a kind of also a mood result of increased inflammation. And it's just absolutely fascinating that this is how the body is influencing your brain state, your mental state. And that's the kind of readout that is making you feel better or worse. Now, the story with the gut microbiome is actually just a lot earlier. I could be saying the exact same thing 10 years from now, but we're not quite there yet because, like I said, there are these kind of very strong correlations. But the causal evidence is, good in animals and not necessarily there in humans because our gut microbiome is so complex and influenced by so many things, in particular, like antibiotic use is a big one. And so that ends up making it look like there are microbiome differences between groups. But I think in some ways that evidence is going to be a little bit harder to unpack. There probably are important roles for some people, maybe not for everyone.
Mm-hmm. The book, The Balanced Brain, it is just wonderful. I really am appreciative of your sending it along, and I just can't recommend it enough. I'm not the only one. The book has gotten rave reviews online, and I found this that I just thought was just so helpful to me, and I think will be helpful to our audience. The review is from Nicola Rehani, who is the author of The Social Instinct, and Nicola Rehani says, "Simply brilliant. This is science writing at its best. If you want to understand mental health, really understand it, read this book." Again, our guest is Dr. Camilla Nord, author of this fantastic book, The Balanced Brain, The Science of Mental Health. One of the other elements of the book that I found fascinating, and we hear a fair bit about this subject of dopamine, but that you talk about it not just in the sense that it's the pleasure molecule, but it also offers this ability to be kind of a learning signal, which I thought was brilliant, especially for those of us who are aging and perhaps we're pursuing a second act post midlife. Maybe we're even struggling to find a purpose. But tell us a little bit about dopamine and this idea of it being a learning signal, because I think that's very helpful.
Yeah, this was something that blew my mind. And in
Yeah.
reality, this is why I went into science, was when I first learned about dopamine, which is now well over a decade ago, I became kind of enthralled by the idea that the same chemical in your brain that is involved in Parkinson's disease, a condition where your movement is impaired, so initiating movements becomes very difficult because you have a deficit of dopamine, that very same molecule was also involved in something like motivation and reward. And if you didn't have enough of it, you also ended up with problems in those domains. Sometimes they look like emotional problems or, problems just sort of motivating yourself to do something, getting yourself, up and at 'em. And I guess I just felt obsessed by the idea that the very same neurotransmitter in the brain somehow could orchestrate these two complex and very, in my mind, especially at the time, disparate functions, something like movement, something like reward. Now, actually, I have more recently, I think about dopamine. You can think of movement as just a way of executing your thoughts. So, of course, the same things that might help your thoughts, help your cognitions move along, let's say, you can see the link better. But it is just kind of a really compelling story. And I guess I'll tell at my talk next week I will tell one of my favorite dopamine stories, although it is not the only one, about the discovery that dopamine is the crucial prediction error signal, which means when you experience something that is unexpectedly good, that is a learning signal for your brain communicated via dopamine.
Kind of a tip-off.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I don't mean that lightly. I mean, it really has a powerful, almost, just a flashpoint that we need to pay attention to and learn more about. Again, the book is just wonderful. Dr. Camilla Nord, written The Balanced Brain. You talk about this idea of mental and physical health being deeply intertwined. And so I wonder if you give our audience, all of us, me most definitely, some advice about, how do we manage chronic pain, perhaps some fatigue or just general illness so that we're protecting our mental health at the same time? Because if they are intertwined, both are going on.
Yeah, I start my book talking about chronic pain, which is probably a surprising area to start from a mental health researcher's point of view. Is pain mental health really? But actually, I start it because I think the crucial aspect of, the construction of your own mental health that I wanted to get across was input from the body. And pain, especially chronic pain, behaves very similarly to something like mood. So it is influenced by your predictions about the state of the environment. In the case of pain, the predictions about the state of your body's environment. Sometimes in the rest of the world, you're predicting your outside environment as well. But the point is that the functions of the brain, the processes that are causing you to feel better or worse, are often common across physical feelings and sort of mental feelings, mental health feelings. And that's where pain links in. That's why a state like being in pain, being in chronic pain, is just so influential over your mental health. But that's also why, maybe that's obvious in that direction, that's also why something like depression actually predisposes you to developing chronic pain in the future, because they have this neural overlap in the brain. And, what would I take away from that? Well, there are a couple things. The first is that your brain is really critical in how you're feeling, even for something that is, almost like completely physical in how you would think about it. Maybe it's an injury, maybe it's fatigue caused by a pre-existing condition. Your brain can still mediate the amount that it affects you personally. You see this all over medicine, that two people with the same degree of degeneration or pathology in some condition will have different experiences of disability because it's filtered by their brain's perception of their disability, the attention their brain pays to the pain, to the fatigue. So there are ways that you might be able to change that with training, with physiotherapy, with cognitive training. So there are kind of, I suppose, ways to turn the dial. I'm not saying turn on and off, but shift the amount of influence physical symptoms might be having on your life.
And even perhaps some self-care. And so I want to ask you a little bit about something that we hear more and more of, and that's the subject of psychedelics, but also this idea of social connectivity. During COVID, when so many of us were shut in, we really underwent some pretty severe mental health challenges. And so I wonder if you'll tell us a little bit about those areas and how that can be improved by just even some self-care with knowledge of those things.
Yeah. What's interesting I experienced probably the lowest mood I have had thus far in my life from the kind of social isolation we had from
Yeah.
COVID. In the UK, we were in social isolation for months. It was really like very profoundly different from the sort of life that we'd led before. And it felt interminable, which I think was very key. In the early days, it wasn't so bad. It was kind of different. It was kind of exciting. We assumed there would be a sort of end in sight. Maybe we were scared. I think at that time, the main emotion I sort of felt was fear. You were maybe scared of other people, scared for yourself or your friends or your family members. But there wasn't this kind of true isolation, I think, until much later. when it felt that it was ongoing and kind of inescapable. And I think that does actually tell us about, one social contributor to things like depression, which is isolation, which is feeling like something is general and forever and not impermanent or escapable. This is the kind of ways that we in psychology and neuroscience think about, where depression comes from in the brain. It tends to be, perception of your state as really, really difficult, unending, general, thinking quite, and I think that also gives you a little bit of insight into how those might be changed, finding an escape, realizing you still have agency, realizing you can actually see the nuances in your life. It doesn't have to be all negative just because one thing, even one big thing, is negative. And those can be little escape routes that you can find, yourself through self-help. Of course, very different in psychedelic therapy. So psychedelic therapy is this idea which has been around for a long time, then went out of fashion for a few decades, now is very much back in fashion, that you might be able to take a drug like psilocybin or LSD or MDMA, sometimes counted in the same category, and that drug would give you often quite a quick relief from some mental health condition that you're experiencing. And I want to say, from a scientific perspective, the results are pretty outstanding. So it has, in trials, these enormous effects on people's mental well-being. But you have to take that with a grain of salt, actually like quite a big handful of salt, because all of those trials tend to recruit people who are themselves very enthusiastic about psychedelics. Their expectations are enormous. And that's always a problem in trials, but it's an extra big problem for psychedelics because they're very difficult to blind, meaning people who take them when they're in the active condition, they know they got the real drug. And when they're in the placebo condition, they usually think they didn't. Sometimes they do it. You can have, placebo psychedelic responses, which I write about a little bit in my book because I think they're so cool. But mostly, if you've taken it, you know you've taken it. And that is a real scientific problem for knowing whether they truly work beyond the effect of expectations, which is itself a very, very powerful kind of treatment for mental health problems, or at least, intervention. So for me, I think the psychedelic research, very promising, potentially a theory that I put forward in my book is that the mechanisms by which psychedelics work are not that distinct from existing treatments like psychotherapy. I think psychedelics modify beliefs and expectations about the world. They do it rather quickly, and that's why sometimes you can have side effects, but that is ultimately the same goal as psychotherapy, which does it over a longer term, aiming to challenge maladaptive beliefs and help you develop a better predictive model of the world. So potentially there's a kind of role for psychedelics in the future of medicine and mental health. I would say especially integrated into psychological therapy techniques to help really kind of make sure that they're safe and decrease the number of adverse effects, and also maybe boost their effectiveness, help them last longer, be better integrated.
Wonderful. Dr. Camilla Nord, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I really just have, in the interest of time, I know you're very busy. I just have really one kind of final question. I mentioned that my own family has certainly struggled with mental health. And I think the thing that often we walked away with, and I know many do too, is they face this kind of notion of mental health with a lack of hope. And your book certainly gives us hope. And I just thought that was just a really empowering concept. You must agree, but maybe tell us, in your research, what did you come across that surprised you, that really focused your attention on a direction for the book being so hopeful?
Thank you. I really hope that's the case. I did write a hopeful book, I think,
Yeah.
because, my genuine perspective. So I run a lab at the University of Cambridge. We're a big lab. Everyone who I hire in my lab shares this vision that I have of hope. And specifically, we think that neuroscience can play a vital role in transforming our ability to treat mental health conditions. So at the moment, we have some pretty good treatments. Something like antidepressants, something like CBT, they're pretty good. They treat about half of all people, maybe a little more. Sometimes they come with some negative effects. Often they benefit people, but they're not perfect and they don't work for everyone. And in my lab, in my career, I am dedicated to discovering new ways of treating people, especially using the incredible discoveries that we've made about the brain to make better and more effective therapies. That might mean more tailored therapies. So finding out what might work for you rather than trial and error through some kind of systematic science-based approach. It might also mean trying more experimental therapies. So something I've been involved in throughout my career is brain stimulation. And I have actually been, as you say, really quite positively surprised, really inspired by the number of patients for whom nothing else has worked. Nothing else. And yet they try something new like brain stimulation, and all of a sudden they have, for the first time, a remission of major depression. And to me, that really tells me that we should keep going. We can do better. We are already starting to do better. And that's why my book is hopeful.
Dr. Camilla Nord, thank you. We hope you do keep going with all of this, and congratulations on the wonderful book. The title again is The Balanced Brain, The Science of Mental Health. Dr. Camilla Nord, a Smithsonian Associate's been our guest today. We will have links so that you can find out more about Dr. Nord and her wonderful book, The Balanced Brain. Dr. Nord, we'll see you at Smithsonian Associates coming up, but I'll just say selfishly, as you do more work in this area, please come back, because we will value an ongoing conversation about this subject. As you learn more, we'd love to learn more too. So thank you. Congrats. All the best to you. And we'll see you at Smithsonian Associates coming up.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited for my talk.
My thanks to Smithsonian Associate Dr. Camilla Nord, who will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up. And the title of her presentation there is The Balanced Brain, The Science of Mental Health. Please check out our show notes today for more details about Dr. Nord's upcoming Inside Science Smithsonian Associates presentation. But my thanks always to the Smithsonian team for all they do to support our show. My thanks to you, our wonderful audience here on radio and podcast. Be well, be safe, and let's talk about better. The Not Old, Better Show. Smithsonian Associates Inside Science Interview Series on radio and podcast. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next week.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates Interview Series on radio and podcast. Join us again next time as we deep dive into some of the most fascinating real-life stories from across the world, all focused on this wonderful experience of getting better, not just older. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates Interview Series on Community Radio.